A preseason scrimmage suddenly turned deadly for lineman Gavin Class.
The doctor grabs us and takes us into a little side room, sits us down, and I'm sorry.
It was heat stroke, but against all odds, he recovered.
Working my way from getting out of the chair into a wheelchair, then getting out of the chair into a walker, and eventually graduating to a cane.
He's hoping to return to his college team, but the school says for his own protection, he cannot play.
Well, we walked in a meeting and flat out the doctor said, I'm never clearing him. That was her exact words. I'm basing my decision on fear.
He's going, come on.
His attorney is fighting to get him on the field, and a medical expert is on his side.
Is there any medical reason he shouldn't be on the field right now?
Absolutely not.
Today outside the lines, after nearly dying on the field, does he have a right to play?
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
The very same drive and force of will that helped Gavin Class to survive when his body temperature was at least 108 degrees, his organs shutting down, when later 47 staples held his torso together following a 6-hour liver transplant. Now, 2 years after he nearly died on the football field, that drive is leading him to fight to return and play. Despite the fact that Gavin's trauma surgeon says if it were him, he'd be spectating and not playing. For Gavin Class, his career clock is desperately ticking, but he has two indispensable modern American assets: a raging sense that his legal rights are being impeded and an adroit lawyer to do something about that. It's a story that's a lot more complex than that, and Paula Levine reports it.
Gavin Class is waiting for the call. It could come any day now. While he waits, the 6'4" guard works out for hours at a time with two personal trainers.
Keep it tight, keep it tight.
He goes to class at Towson University. And he hangs out with his teammates. But until the call comes, he can't join them again on the field. Maybe he never will. Just before the 2013 season, Class bench pressed 440 pounds, the most ever by an offensive lineman at Towson.
That summer, I was lifting and running. I'd go there, lift, afternoon, and then we'd always have running sessions 4 days a week and lifting 4 days a week.
It was the best shape he's been in his entire life.
On a Saturday in August, Johnny and Danielle Class watched their son play in a preseason scrimmage. 2 days later,
I was sitting on the couch watching a movie and my cell phone rings.
trainers initially said Class was just a little dehydrated and was headed to the hospital.
I pulled up and there was 15 of his teammates standing outside and they're all crying. Walked in and the doctor grabs us and takes us into a little side room. Sits us down and I'm sorry. Sits us down and says that he's probably not gonna live. He had 108 temperature, he was in a coma. All his organs had shut down. That we could go see him for a minute, but then we had to get out of the room. And
he was covered in ice bags from head to toe, trying to get his temperature down.
I don't remember a single thing of that day, absolutely nothing.
Class had suffered a heat stroke that sent his organs, especially his liver, into a free fall. He was transported to the University of Maryland Medical Center under the care of transplant surgeon Rolf Barth.
The data, the odds probably would have said even with a transplant, he had a 75% chance he would die. We prepared for a very difficult, potentially kind of an against the odds course.
hey buddy.
Class received a new liver and spent 6 weeks in the hospital. There were good days, like when he stood for the first time. And there were setbacks.
And we were laughing about something and he just coughed and it made this really loud noise and his eyes got big and I looked down and his intestines had popped out.
She's like, get over here. So I go over, lift up his gown, and she's holding his intestines. And I'm like, you're right, something's not right.
It wasn't just an operation where we could roll out and high five and say he's better. We knew that this was going to be weeks and months.
What were some of the first questions he had for you?
Can I play football again?
Didn't never really cross my mind that I wasn't going to come back and play.
Got it.
Working my way from getting out of the chair into a wheelchair, then getting out of the chair into a walker, and eventually graduating to a cane.
Switch.
Class spent the next year working out to get back on the roster. He would be the first adult liver transplant recipient to play Division I college football.
My offensive line coach was always like, I can't wait to have you back out here. It was words of encouragement and kept making me want to come back.
He embodies the concept of determination.
Some of the strongest support came from head coach Rob Ambrose at a team banquet in April 2014.
He's still here, and he's still fighting, and his rear end will wear a helmet again one day. We had a conversation as a staff about how to do this.
By the fall of 2014, Class wanted to do light workouts with the team.
Well, we went there for a meeting just to clear him the workout. Well, we walked into the meeting and flat out the doctor said, I'm never clearing him.
That decision came from Dr. Carrie Kinchy, medical director for Towson Athletics.
They were afraid that he would have another heat stroke, but she had no proof. She was basing her decision on fear. That was her exact words. I'm basing my decision on fear.
A Towson trainer advised Class to get tested at the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut, named after the Minnesota Vikings player who died of heat stroke in 2001.
We assess if they're able to deal with exercise in the heat again, and if they are able to, we help them develop enhancing that process to the point where then they can return to their sport.
Dr. Douglas Casa tests athletes by having them swallow a pill thermometer that allows their core body temperature to be monitored during exercise. In August 2014, Class failed that test. In February, he tried again.
And this time he passes the test. And then we had him come back again in the end of June. We wanted to have more higher intensity activity, stop and go kind of activity, things that would be more similar to a football practice. During that activity, we thought he did exceptionally well.
He's going, come on.
Dr. Casa gave Class the all clear to return to football as long as trainers monitor his core temperature.
They can literally go up behind him, and within 1 second or 2 seconds, you know his body temperature. So ironically, he'd actually be the safest person on the field because no one else is having his temperature checked during activity.
You have been studying this for 20 years plus. You've assessed Gavin Class. Is there any medical reason he shouldn't be on the field right now?
Absolutely not.
In your expertise, is there any medical reason that Gavin Class should not be playing football right now?
I don't think any more than any other athlete who wants to play football.
But Casa and Barth's expert opinions were not enough for Towson's Dr. Kinchy. A letter from school officials in May stated the liver transplant was not an impediment to returning to football. Mr. Class's risk of another heat stroke, however, is another matter, which Towson says it can't manage with any reasonable restriction or accommodation.
Gavin's family offered to pay for the entire cost of the accommodations.
Attorney Andrew Danziger represents Gavin Class and his family.
He also offered to sign a waiver saying that if there's any kind of problem that comes up, they will absolve the university of any liability.
What's your plans for the day?
But Towson stood firm. So the Classes filed a discrimination lawsuit under the Americans with Disabilities Act, using the definition Congress broadened a few years ago.
They said that a disability can be something that, even though it doesn't affect you right now, if it affects you severely when it's actually occurring, like a seizure. When you're having a seizure, you're disabled. And it's the same thing with a heat stroke.
Towson University declined interview requests by Outside the Lines. But in an affidavit, Dr. Kinchy questioned the reliability of the ingestible thermometer and said requiring core temperature monitoring would be beyond the scope of practice of an athletic trainer in Maryland.
We have high school athletic trainers that are one-man shows, like one lady or one-man athletic trainer servicing an entire high school have done monitoring of athletes who are at risk for heat stroke. I'm pretty sure an entire medical staff at a Division I football program could certainly handle occasional monitoring of one athlete during practice.
A federal district judge agreed and ordered Towson to allow Class to return to the team. But almost immediately, the court suspended the order while Towson appealed. The NCAA also weighed in with a brief that argues team doctors should have ultimate and autonomous authority in saying who's fit to play.
I think the university's concern, and I think the NCAA's concern also, is that we don't want a situation where players are going to come in with their doctors and try to dictate to the team what the team and the university should do.
If he was my son, I think I would advise against playing D1 football at this time.
Dr. John Goss has performed more than 1,500 liver transplants. He's put football players back on the field, but at the high school and lower division college level.
I think that a Division I college football player is considered an elite athlete. The risk of being hit and having an injury when you're immunosuppressed and had other problems, I think it is something that probably doesn't need to be taken.
A child can get hurt playing baseball, a child can get hurt playing anything. You can't predict the future, and you just have to live.
A large scar across his abdomen is a reminder of how far he's come. He waits, not for the coaches, not for his body, but for the courts to decide whether or not he can return to football.
You got a liver transplant. Why at that point couldn't you just say, look, you know what? I've been given another chance at life. Maybe I'm not going to get another chance at football.
Because, I don't want to give up, and I'm doing this to send a message and be an inspiration.
Paula Levine reporting. Gavin Class is waiting for that federal appeals court to rule on whether to lift the stay that right now still keeps him off the field. Even if the court ruling is in his favor, he would need an NCAA waiver, and there are 7 games currently remaining in Towson's season. It's not clear how quickly his waiver request could be addressed. The NCAA, as we did note in our report, standing with Towson in this case, as does, by the way, the National Athletic Trainers Association and the American Medical Society for Sports Medicine. Dr. John Devine is the president of that organization. He's also the team physician for the University of Cincinnati. We welcome him, and we also say hello to a man who supports Gavin Class in his quest to play again. He is Tom Nealon, the CEO of the American Liver Foundation, and he sees a great message in Gavin's story. And welcome to you both. All right, Tom, make the case from your standpoint why Gavin Class should play.
Well, Gavin is, needless to say, a truly dedicated and heroic young man to have fought his way back from the injury and the transplant experience that he had. And we are strongly in favor of individuals and athletes following a transplant being able to live full and active lives in consultation with their medical specialist. And we regularly in the Liver Foundation have athletes who perform and engage in a number of activities, running marathons, snowboarding, other activities that demonstrate that you can, after a liver transplant, have a full and active life.
Tom, how often do liver transplant patients return to a sport as violent as Division I football?
Well, I will readily admit I do not have the statistics on that, and I think it's really a function of a couple factors. One, the position. I think it's certainly helpful in Gavin's case. He's playing offensive guard, and he has padding that is not unusual for people who might have rib or other conditions that they're trying to protect. So I think it's, minimal likelihood that he playing that position, he's probably more likely, unfortunately, to have a concussion or injure, some of his joints than he is to sustain another liver injury.
No. Dr. Devine, I think we all stipulate this is a rather heroic story. I mean, the young man was given up for dead at one point, probably 110 degrees. 108 was after he was in the ice tub. But there's a but, at least, to some medical professionals in the story. To your mind, what is that?
Bob, I would agree with Tom that this is a very heroic thing that Gavin's doing, very noble. The but for myself, and I think many of our team physicians across the country, would be that the issue of the heat illness on top of the liver transplant puts him into a category of a player that Tom mentioned. He's not aware of any liver transplant patients going back to Division I football. I'm not either, and I'm definitely not aware of any that go back after having a severe heat stroke on top of having the organ transplant. And so that would be my major concern.
So which specifically, doctor, to your mind, would create the risk, and what is the risk physically? Is it from the transplant? Is it from the heat stroke?
I believe it's both. I believe that the risk of the heat stroke is definitely there. Doug Casa is a good colleague and friend of ours, and in papers he's written that this can occur in up to 20% of people that have already had a heat stroke. And so the likelihood of Gavin having another heat stroke is high. And in fact, I think it was a great idea that they even tested him in the first place. I think this goes well above and beyond what we'd see at a lot of institutions. I believe that risk is high at 20%, and after playing in a game last night, I had 3 linemen that had temperatures at least over 102 on a night game in Memphis, and so it does occur even in people that have not had heat stroke problems before. You combine that with already having had liver problems in the form of a liver transplant, and it really makes us kind of hold our breath.
It's a sensitive issue in terms of, we have a division here of medical opinion. I want to read a statement we got Friday from the medical group that employs the Towson team physician, Dr. Kinchy. The medical opinion rendered by Dr. Kari Kinchy in the Gavin Class case was fully supported by a number of highly experienced and respected physicians from multiple disciplines. They include 4 of the region's top sports medicine experts from the MedStar health system, as well as from outside the system. So, Tom, you've got experts lining up on one side. You also have those at the Stringer Institute, Dr. Cass et al., saying the opposite side. What do you make, from the Liver Institute standpoint, of this division of medical opinion?
Well, I think it's somewhat interesting and probably worthwhile to note that in Gavin's case, he sustained a certainly atypical football, and for that matter, atypical sports injury, and I have no question as to the credentials and the qualifications of the medical director and, for that matter, the trainers at all of the Division I institutions across the country. I think the real issue is that under the return to play policy that I gather is in place in all of these institutions, basically, a player turns over total control and decision-making to the medical director and specifically recognizes that his own physicians, his or her own physicians, are not relevant to that decision. And I think the right course of action is certainly that the ultimate decision can be and should be that of the institution. But I think when you have a non-standard injury such as this, there should be a requirement, and it should be demonstrated that they consulted with and collaborated with experts here, such as liver specialists and heat stroke specialists, because I wouldn't expect, nor should anybody, that medical directors at institutions across the country are experts in either of those categories.
What was interesting, Doctor, in what Tom said, talked about the forfeiture, essentially, of college athletes of having their own physicians in that. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. I mean, in our environment, we talk about a 3-person group, if you will, of who decides who goes back onto the field. And that's first and foremost the athlete, the local athletic trainer, and the team physician. And if one of those 3 has a problem with going back out on the field, then we hold them out. And with the medical model of sports medicine being so much more different than the traditional, I'm going to my doctor's office today, next month, next year, whatever, we see our athletes every day. And so we're used to seeing what struggles they have. We're used to seeing what the specific challenges of their sport and their training are. And so our expertise in this is our ability to decide, is it safe for that athlete to return to play? And I think that's where Dr. Kinchy and many of our other team physicians physicians across the country make those decisions every day, multiple times a day on different players on when they can safely return back to play. And so we believe that that has to stay locally.
Again, about a minute to go, Doctor. If the young man wins and this stay is lifted under the Americans with Disability Act, do you fear the loss of medical independence?
We do, and even on a local environment, on that team itself, if Gavin's cleared to go back to play, he's going to have to be monitored by the medical staff that he has this disagreement with. Who's going to make those subsequent decisions over when they monitor him during practices and games, when he should come out of play, when the medical staff has already said, hey, we're not comfortable with you being out there in the first place. So it really does make it a difficult decision locally and nationally.
We await the decision from that federal appellate court. Could be some new law perhaps being written. Dr. John Devine, appreciate your time, sir. And Tom Nealon, thank you for joining us today Outside the Lines. We can continue the conversation on our Outside the Lines Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at Bob Lee ESPN. Of course, we're on satellite radio, Sirius XM Channel 81 in the new lineup, and subscribe at iTunes. We'll get you our OTL podcast direct to your device every single day. We'll be right back.